Hello, this is Armel Jacobs of the Coalition of Families for Inclusion, aka COFFI. You're watching COFFI Klatch, where we discuss topics of inclusion and celebrate the people bringing more attention to these issues. Today we're meeting Dan Guller, a small business owner, actor, and a master of improvisation. He has decades of experience performing at some of New York City's biggest venues and lives in Darien, Connecticut with his husband and young son. Dan is also a local activist and community organizer who chairs the Darien Pride Committee. Dan does so much to bring the community together to celebrate diverse points of view. We can't wait to share all of his efforts with you. Let's get some coffee. Hi, Dan.
Hey, Armel.
Thank you so much for joining us. You are our second ever COFFI Klatch guest, and I'm so honored to have you today. How are you?
I'm great. I'm excited to be your second guest. This is fun.
My guinea pig.
We're blazing the trail.
We're blazing it, and it's hot. It's blazing.
Yeah. The trail is outside.
There's
not
a
so
lot.
much.
There's a lot going on.
Oh, yes, there is.
And I am, very grateful for all of the stuff that you're doing to mark the path and shine a light on some of these issues that need some attention. So I'd love to jump right in. Why don't you introduce yourself and tell everybody a little bit about Dan Guller?
Okay. Well, I'm Dan Guller. I've lived in Darien for 13 years. I grew up in St. Louis, Missouri, in a nice suburb of St. Louis, pretty similar to Darien. Like same size homes, but the homes cost, half of what they cost here.
As they do.
Yeah. And went to Syracuse University for broadcast journalism. And I stumbled into a well-paying job acting, which had always been just kind of a hobby. And so I thought, well, let's see where this takes me. So that's the direction I went in. And that eventually took me to New York, where I lived for 16 years. And while I was in New York, I met Eric, who eventually became my husband. We moved up to Darien in 2009. We looked around for quite a while to find just the right house for us, and we eventually did here in the Norotan section of Darien. We're about a 6-minute walk from the Norotan Heights train station, which we love.
What are some of your impressions of this community from your perspective as a Jewish, gay parent in this town?
Well, I'll tell you first.
Loaded question, maybe.
Yes. I'll tell you first the impression I was given before we moved here.
Okay.
I talked to people about us moving to Darien, and I think it was my sister who has friends who live up in this area, and she said, well, you know what? They're not going to have a problem in Darien with you as a same-sex couple. Just don't tell them you're Jewish.
Oh.
And she was half kidding because Darien has a history, but that was the general impression that I was given when we first moved here. Shortly after I moved here, I started looking for a synagogue to call home. And as I was looking around, I would talk to people and they said, oh, where did you move to? And I'd say Darien. And they'd say, oh, Jews don't live in Darien. And my immediate reaction was, well, Jews won't live in Darien until Jews move to Darien. Like, this isn't the 50s and 60s anymore. There's no policy. There's no agreement. There's nothing. Anyone can live anywhere pretty much. And this is the place we wanted to live in. So I'm a Jew. I moved to Darien. That's the end of it. So that's the background. That's what I was. That's what was in my head as we moved here, and we as a same-sex couple, never had any issues at all. No one was anything but welcoming, to our faces. I don't know what they said when they went home, but that didn't really apply to me.
Mm-hmm.
Our neighbors have been great. We never had problems at restaurants. There was just simply no issue. And then same with being Jewish in town. I don't know that I ever said much, but I would put out a menorah at Hanukkah time in the window and never got any complaints or problems. Our neighborhood block party was scheduled on Yom Kippur a couple of times, and that it wasn't malicious. It was just kind of a lack of paying attention, really.
Awareness.
Yeah. And I think that was the first moment when I thought, well, Darien is filled with wonderful people who just don't know. It just doesn't occur to them that maybe don't have the block party on Yom Kippur, because then not everyone can attend. And it just wasn't on their radar. At that time, I didn't feel I was the one to put it on anyone's radar. I was working full time.
Mm-hmm.
My husband was a compliance officer for a couple of large financial corporations, both in Connecticut and then in New York. And so I wasn't in a position to get politically involved because I didn't want any ethics lines to be crossed. I wanted his job to be safe. That was most important. And so that was just kind of how we did. And the block party never happened on Yom Kippur again, and everyone was contrite. And then slowly things changed, not with the general attitude of the town. Again, individually, everyone was very kind. And so we had always described Darien as a fiscally conservative town. That meant that, they don't care what you do behind closed doors, as long as you don't, mess with the value of their 401k or their home.
Yeah. You be as gay as you want, be as Jewish as you want, just don't tax me.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that was pretty true for many years. And then a few years ago, I'd say probably around the 2016 election.
Yeah, I was gonna say maybe somewhere around 2016.
Things changed a little bit. And again, Darien is a very well-educated town, again, generally socially liberal. So I know the town itself did not vote for Trump. There were more votes for Hillary Clinton than there were Donald Trump in Darien for 2016. But I started to see people being a little more comfortable with ultra-conservative views that they would express on social media and in more public forums. There was a guy who decided to fly a Confederate flag in Noroton Heights, keeping in mind that the Mason-Dixon line is that way, significantly.
Yeah, we're not close.
Right. And it was simply meant to agitate.
Yeah.
And that was the first time I think I really saw when someone was really just saying, here's how I'm going to keep poking at people.
Yeah. How has that sort of impacted you as sort of a civic participant here?
Well,
because I know you are a big time civic participant.
I am. It lit a bit of a spark under me. I thought, especially after Trump won, I just, and I'm sure a lot of people were the same. I'm sure you were the same. I was just flabbergasted that enough people wanted Donald Trump to be president that he was able to at least win the Electoral College. it just blew my mind. And I felt like maybe sitting at my computer and typing snarky responses to my conservative friends wasn't enough. You know,
Yeah.
maybe that is not how you create change. Family at all. So I started to, and then in 2018, our son was born. And so I focused on him for a little bit, but I kept thinking, this is his world, and he's going to grow up in Darien.
Mm-hmm.
And we were very aware that he, a blue-eyed blonde boy, would be growing up in this very, majority Caucasian town without a lot of diversity in it. And so it would be up to us to help him experience and learn about diversity. So that was a burden on us. When we put him in daycare and preschool, we actually sent him to a preschool in West Norwalk at the synagogue where I wound up going to, so he could be around some Jewish children. It's not an exclusively Jewish school. There's actually a lot of kids of a variety of religions and colors and backgrounds. So I really liked that he was making friends with kids who are different than him.
Yeah.
And there was also, there's another kid in his class that has two moms. So we liked that he was going to be able to have a friend that had same-sex parents also.
Mm-hmm.
And so through that desire, again, I'm thinking, okay, what can I do? What can I do? And then my husband gets another job as a compliance officer for a company that is not regulated, but still does business with regulated companies. So they needed to make sure that they were in compliance, but there was no more concern about activities that could be viewed as political or that were overtly political. And I was able to start getting to know some of these people better, and also got to know some of the issues of the town and a little more about how the town works. I'm sure you experienced it when you moved here, this first selectman and board of selectmen model of government with the representative town meeting is a uniquely New England form of government.
And it's confusing in terms of how to figure out what are the responsibilities of the different bodies, who is a check and a balance on whom, and how does the local governance actually work here. I mean, I've been here for a long time, almost 9 years. And even now, it's very difficult for me to sort of have a real true understanding of how to get informed, when these meetings are happening, who has what responsibilities. It's tough.
Yeah, it really is. There's the board of finance, which is an elected board, but then there's also the finance and budget committee on the RTM, the representative town meeting. And so it took me a while to figure out, well, how do they work together, or do they? And
yeah,
it's really, it is dense and difficult to slog through and figure it all out. So I certainly understand people who are not fully engaged in our town government because you're never quite sure what it's doing.
Yeah. I think this was an idea that I had a little while ago. Just, me, I'm always coming up with a million wacky ideas and initiatives. And I'm so grateful for all the people who always consistently support me. But here's another one that's been kicking around in the back. A high school club that creates a blog, which is just like straight up one place where you can go to learn what's happening when. Here are all the agendas. This is coming next week, just like a civics club that basically can, put out like here's what the RTM is here, just one spot, because there's lots of siloed places that have a piece of it. And I think like a couple of tech savvy, awesome kids who want to learn more, have an interest in politics, could be a great way to, you know, earn some credits, spend their time, beef up their resumes.
I think it's a great idea. There's so much going on in this town that people just don't know about because you know they're busy with their lives, and I get that they've got work and they've got the kids, and we've got several neighbors that I don't think their cars ever turn off during the day. Like they're taking this practice and this one over here and that one goes back
drop
there.
off.
And and there's not time to then go sit in on a 2-hour Board of Ed meeting, let alone go onto the town website to look up the agenda to see what is going to be on the Board of Ed meeting for that next week to see if it's anything that is of interest. The town has approved armed school security officers to go into the grade schools, and I guarantee most people in this town don't know that is happening. There were no comments at the Board of Finance meeting that dealt with it. There were no comments at the Board of Ed meeting that dealt with it because people didn't know it was happening.
I think, not to wade too deeply into some of this stuff, but there is 100% an information vacuum in this place. And a lot of people are like, beautiful beaches, great schools, that's why I'm here. I don't want to think about this stuff. And then sort of unbeknownst to them, the boots on the ground are making decisions that do actually have some social impact in their lives that they don't really understand until it's happening, until their kid sees a dude with a gun every day in their elementary school. So after we tackle the anti-Semitism and the homophobia, we'll get into this information vacuum problem. Okay, so you are a fantastic community organizer, and I am so proud that you have been so effective at bringing people together. So the first time I had ever heard your name was in connection with the Menorah Lighting last year. I was very shook to hear that was our first one ever. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like I was talking to I had like a doctor's appointment, and my doctor, I was like, oh, I'm going to the Menorah Lighting. Did you hear there's a Menorah Lighting? She was like, she works here in Darien. She was like, in Darien? And I was like, yeah. And she was like, I live in New Canaan. We've had one of those, like a town one for like 20 years. I'm a little surprised. That happened because an incredible person named Dan Guller just stood up and said, I think this is a good thing to do. So tell us a little bit about how you got inspired and what that process was like for you that first time around.
Well, first of all, I'll say it wasn't just me, and thank you. But the idea actually started with my friend Michael calling me. He had the previous summer spearheaded the first real Pride observance in Darien, where he had just talked to a bunch of business owners and asked them to fly the Pride flag. This would have been 2021. And he talked to our first selectman to see if she would fly the Pride flag at Town Hall. And she agreed to. And then, he got people to fly flags at home. He and another woman put together Darien Pride signs, which they sold at cost for people to put in their lawns. And it was this huge, wonderful, gorgeous, beautiful effort. And I remember this was on Rosh Hashanah that year in the fall. He called me and said, hey, I was talking to one of our local developers, and who's very interested in diversity, because as a commercial developer, you want to be able to attract diverse tenants, not only residential but commercial.
Yeah, it's good for business.
Yeah, and he said they were talking and they were thinking they should do something for Hanukkah, and he asked if I thought our congregation would be interested in helping out, because there are no congregations in Darien, and I happened to have been at the temple at the time, and I said, my rabbi's a little busy right now. We're getting ready for like the high holy days, but I'll check with her. I'm sure she would love it. And she did. And shortly thereafter, Michael decided he and his husband and their daughter were moving. And I called him and I said, can I take over this Hanukkah project? Because you guys are leaving and I want this to happen. And he said, absolutely. So I reached out to this developer, David Genovese, and Baywater Properties, and we worked together to, I was thinking, what is this going to look like? So Baywater bought this huge, I think it's like a 8-foot menorah or something, 7-foot menorah.
It was big.
It's a really big menorah. It's an electric menorah.
It was a statement.
And working with PG Properties, Penny Glassmeyer, who's also a developer in town, they decided the best place for it would be in the plaza outside where it is on Grove Street Plaza, I guess you could call it. Right there at the fountain. They decided that they'd put the menorah there. And then we thought, okay, what else is this going to look like? And I thought, well, people need to know about it. And, this is where my degree in broadcast journalism kicked in. And so I thought, well, we need to get press releases out, because I want people to report that it is going to happen so that we can get people to the event. Yeah. My goal was we would light the menorah each night, and I wanted to try and get a local Jewish family to be the menorah lighter each night. And I have to be honest, I was like, am I going to find 8 Jewish families in Darien?
Oh no.
Seriously, I didn't know. Like, there's not a cohesive Jewish community in Darien.
There's no JCC.
Right. There is in Stanford. And there's a United Jewish Federation, and they are, in fact, their name is the United Jewish Federation of Stanford, New Canaan, and Darien.
Yeah.
But there haven't been Jewish events in Darien, so I didn't know what kind of a community we had. And
there are a lot of Jewish people here.
There are. And I remember I was once talking to the head rabbi at Temple Shalom, and I asked her, I said, when a new family joins the synagogue, how do you know they're Jewish? And she said, they tell us. That's all we need. We don't need any certificate of having been bar mitzvahed. We don't need to trace lineage. They tell us they're Jewish. They're Jewish.
But that is a significant thing to me, because I feel like what I hear, and this is actual stuff that people have said to me, okay? Actual friends that I have here in town who are Jewish. Not all of them go to temple or practice regularly, but they are of the Jewish ethnicity. People have said to me things like, I'm Jewish, but I don't lead with that here, because sometimes people don't like that. And like when you say what we are relying on here in this community, because of all the historical background, because of all of the gatekeeping and keeping Jewish and Black people out in the past, I think that culturally here, there is a little bit of a silence. There's a silence that is kind of pervasive about being different in many ways, but in particular about being Jewish. And I feel that when you say something like, well, they tell us, here because of that messy history, people don't like to tell. And that is something that I think can be changed with more things like the menorah lighting and more sort of shiny, happy beacons saying, we're here, this is positive. We can dispel maybe some of that fear. But that whole thing where people lead with it and say, oh yeah, our family is Jewish, that is not something you can rely on happening here for whatever reason. And it's tough.
Well, because Darien has a reputation, warranted or not. I believe it is a reputation that's rooted in the past. But what is Darien doing to dispel that reputation? And that's why I think it's so important to get media coverage of these diversity events that we have throughout the year, so that we can say, some stupid kid scrolled a swastika on a locker. We're having a menorah lighting 8 nights. And I'll tell you what, that goal of getting a Jewish family to light the menorah each night, not only was I able to fill up each of the 8 slots with a local Jewish family, I was able to have 2 families every night.
You got a waiting list.
And on some nights we did 3 families.
Yeah, that's amazing.
It was amazing. And I didn't know. I didn't know if anyone was going to come. We were estimating that our big, on the 4th night was the big community celebration, even though we were lighting each night. The 4th night is when I invited politicians, other local business people, and clergy. We anticipated there'd be about 100 people that would show up, 100, 150, somewhere around there.
That ain't what I saw.
The first night lighting was over 100 people. When we didn't even advertise. We just said, okay, there's going to be a lighting every night, but the 4th night is the big celebration. So the first night we got over 100 people. That 4th night, there were like 300-400 people packing Street Plaza. I was overwhelmed. I don't know if you remember.
And that plaza is all twinkly and gorgeous, and it really did feel like, for me, that was actually like a real moment for me on my journey as sort of like a civic participant, because I saw all this and I was like, this is it. This is how you change the culture of a community. You bring people out, you bring them together, and you unite them in the goal of creating positive associations in celebrating a different cultural point of view. And honestly, I have to say, it was so inspiring for me that it made me really start thinking about all of the things and all of the conversations that eventually led to COFFI, because this whole thing about the reputation, like, I'm so passionate about that. I have found that there are so many open-minded, kind, wonderful people of all different faiths, of all different backgrounds. It's not visible. It is not out there. So I feel like, but nothing happens, right? It's never going to be seen if nothing is happening. So I got with Diane and we said, what can we do to kind of create spaces where this stuff can be seen? How can we show that there is so much kindness in this community, so much desire to engage in, inclusive offerings and points of view? If there are no inclusive offerings, you cannot show that there is a real desire and a demand for it. So we said, let's just start doing stuff. And a lot of that was inspired by the fact that you just said, let's do this stuff. Or you and Michael and you and all of the wonderful families who volunteered to stand up and light the menorah. It was so impactful for me just as like a planner here.
I have to say, there were a couple people who didn't like this, but I adored this moment because it really showed how far Darien has come. Rabbi Cantor Sklar, in her remarks on that 4th night, talked about growing up in Norwalk, just one town over. And she said that when she grew up in Norwalk, she was told, what did she say? Explicitly and implicitly that Jews were not welcome in Darien. I mean, this would have been like the 80s, right? And then she said that Darien used to be a sunset community, which means that blacks, Jews, pretty much anyone of any ethnicity were able to be in town to work as domestics, as laborers, as whatever needed to be done during the day in the town. But once the sun had set, they needed to be out of the town limits.
For fear of violence and retribution.
Right. And so she talked about this, and then she took a pause and she looked around and said, so here we are after sunset. And everyone cheered because it was a triumphant moment. It showed how far this town has come towards inclusivity and towards being open to diversity.
Yeah.
And there are people who don't like us to talk about the past because it's uncomfortable. It makes them feel guilty, I was told. And I'm like, well, why does it make you feel guilty? You didn't do it. It's just the truth. It just happened and it's done. So let's bury it and move on. Let's learn from it and move on.
But you can't learn from it if nobody talks about it and nobody knows about it.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about another incredible initiative that was the first of its kind in Darien. You are also the chair of the Darien Pride Committee. Tell me about it.
I am. Well, I told you about the flags that had flown in 2021. That was just the first time we'd ever seen anything like it. And again, it just took Michael to go, this should happen. And he didn't think, oh, people aren't going to like it. He just did it. And yeah, there were some people who didn't like it. Okay, they don't have to fly a flag. This isn't a slam against anyone. This is celebrating, especially, LGBTQ kids who really need this kind of affirmation to know that they are supported and accepted. So that happened. It was great. The menorah lighting happened. It was just mind-blowingly wonderful. I got calls from people who cyber stalked me and got my phone number and called me. And we're so grateful. They said, I've lived in Darien 50 years. There are people who moved here in the 50s. One woman, she's in her late 70s. She said she moved here in the 50s. It was a private sale. It was the only way they were able to get into Darien. And she said that other children weren't allowed to play hopscotch with her when she was a little girl because she was Jewish. And now here she was at this menorah lighting and she teared up and it was beautiful. So I thought, okay, that went well. So, well, how about Pride? What can we do for Pride? And I reached out. There's a Darien Pride Facebook group that I posted on in January and said, okay, Pride is in June. What do you all think Pride should look like? And everyone who replied became the Darien Pride Committee. Like everyone who responded, I'm like, okay, you're on the committee and you're on the committee. And
there were a lot of people.
Yeah. And again, with the help of Baywater Properties, David Genovese and his staff there, they were great help, especially in securing Tilly Pond Park, where we thought would be a great venue for it. Lots of space, lots of, there was electricity. So if we wanted to do music, it was easy enough.
Beautiful park.
Gorgeous park, very Darien. And then the day before, they were predicting lightning and thunderstorms for the day of our event.
Yeah.
And we're
Enter the panic.
We cannot have people hit by lightning our first year of doing Darien Pride. That's like that's like more of a year 4 or 5 kind of thing. I think.
That's not the journey that we wanted to be on this time.
Right. And so we're all panicking, and we all hands are on deck. We're trying to figure out an alternate venue, and the First Congregational Church of Darien stepped up in a huge way. Like there wasn't even a question. It was just, again, what do you need?
Incredible.
And we used their social hall. We used their lawn because it turned out it only lightly rained off and on here and there. And I think, what did we have, like 700-800 people?
It was a ton of people.
Also,
and do you know what was like special for me? There were a ton of youth. There were so many young kids. And I was just sort of like popping around, like, do you need a chair? Do you need like just sort of like circulating? Because you were on stage, like leading the whole thing. And so I was just sort of like checking in on people and just sort of meandering. And what I was hearing were so many little exchanges that just like warmed me so much. Like teenagers, like I walked by a set of teenagers once, and there was someone who just like popped by a friend and went, "Oh my gosh, you're here? I didn't know you were an ally. Awesome." And I was just like, ah, my heart. Like, it's just when you can sort of give people like the ways to be connected on issues that help them feel seen. It was awesome. Also, we had a fantastic drag queen, Boxa Kranz, who was so spectacular and did like a whole lip sync performance that was incredible. And Boxa was basically our like celeb icon, because those students were mobbing Boxa after. And it was just so incredible to see like the joy and excitement in their faces, to see someone on stage who was from Darien, who had sort of walked this journey and was very touched and surprised to see how far it's come in such a short time since they had graduated. So it was so special.
It really was. I thought having a drag queen that grew up queer in Darien was really incredible. Boxer reached out to me to see if we needed entertainment, and we had been talking about it, and I thought, oh, this is exactly what we need. And the performance was great. Our son, our 4-year-old son loved it. Everyone,
mine too.
The whole experience. We gave out our first Voices of Pride award there to the 4 young women who had spoken the previous fall at a Board of Ed meeting where they were discussing about the need for a diversity consultant or not. And these 4 young women testified to the abuse, really, of queer kids in the school, as well as allies, abuse that they witnessed and encountered. And
that was so impactful.
It's tough stuff to talk about as an adult, let alone as a 17-year-old. And they were just so poised, and they showed phenomenal leadership. And that was one of the first things I remember we talked about at one of our meetings in January or February was we should do an award, and it needs to go to those 4 young women.
Yeah, I mean, one of the guiding goals, one of the whole mission of everything was to sort of answer that call, because I think a lot of people in town, when that meeting happened, I think it was in October at some point, we were like, there's a huge problem here if these students are coming to Board of Ed and tearfully begging for help. Like we talk about how like us as adults, like in our circles, we're like, oh, like people are largely nice. Like nobody has threatened me or said anything terrible to me. They're just fiscally conservative. But I have to say, it was very much clear to me that in the schools, it's a different situation. I'll link it to the video here, but people can see for themselves and hear in those kids' own words exactly the type of stuff that was going on when they came out of the closet. And we really felt, I think as the adults, I don't know how you felt. Honestly, I was ashamed. I was like, look at these kids standing up, being leaders, being honest, speaking truth. And here we are, a bunch of adults sitting here just being like, oh, the beaches and schools are great. Like, I felt like, what am I doing? Why is it on our students, on our youngest community members to get up there and shake things? We should be doing this. This is our responsibility.
And exactly. I've got the support I need. And Darien Pride is to show those who might need that support that they have it. If they're not getting it at home, then they've got a community.
Yeah.
If their town, say, refuses to fly a pride flag, then we'll fly
For
it
example.
For example, I just pulled that out of.
I don't know where.
I really feel like in this context, I'm not doing this as a gay man. I'm doing this as an ally.
Yeah. But you know what? We should, I'm making light of it, but actually we should discuss it, because one thing I know, I was so impressed with the town's response at Pride. We had our first select person, Monica. She got up on stage and gave a beautiful, wonderful, accepting, kind speech where she talked about the importance of all of the things that we're saying. And I was proud. I was so proud. I was like, I am proud that this is the message of our leader of this town. I am grateful for that, because that's what these kids need to see. I love
and
it.
I think it's worth saying that she is a Republican.
This is 100%.
And this was not a political event. This was not a partisan event. It was open to everyone, and I was really pleased that she came and spoke so well.
Yeah, we had the community values statement that came out a couple of months later. It feels like that we were sort of all coming together as just people, not Republicans or Democrats, people who want to send a message of kindness. And I was like very, very much impressed. It's hard now to square that with the flag ban. We know that it is not targeted toward pride in particular, and I think that is worth saying.
No, I'm serious.
We know that it has been said. We know that it has been said that it is not.
They have claimed that it is not targeted toward pride, but let's be honest. As background, the Board of Selectmen, 5-person board that is kind of in charge of the town, voted 3-2 to instill a ban on flying all flags on town property other than the US flag, the Connecticut flag, and the Darien flag. All other flags are banned. Now, they had the option of putting together a policy, a flag flying policy, whereas perhaps in the one that the town attorney recommended of those policies mirrored the one of South Windsor, where if a person wanted a flag flown, they would apply to the town. That application would be reviewed by the Board of Selectmen and accepted or rejected. They opted instead to go with a complete ban of all non-governmental flags. And the only non-governmental flag to have flown at town properties in the last at least 5 years, if not longer, is the pride flag. So they can say this is about a request they got for flying the Ukraine flag. They can say this is about a Supreme Court case from Boston. But that case only said they needed to define their parameters.
Yeah.
The only non-governmental flag to have flown at the town of Darien is the pride flag. And they've just made that impossible. For now.
For now. People all across the board, people who are Democrats like me, people who are Republicans, people who are independent, the whole spectrum. There are a lot of very kind, open-minded people here who are fine with other people being gay. And I think that's true for some of our elected officials. I'm not sure it's true for all of them. But this whole thing where the idea that it is more impactful for these individuals to privately support than to do it as town officials, as representatives of the town. I have to say, if you had seen what I had seen at Pride, if you had seen the joy and the exhale, the sigh of relief when people saw the pride, when people saw their first select person in her capacity as first select person giving love to these things, you would know that the private support is great. But what really matters are the public symbols, are the courage to stand up on that stage and say, in Darien, we believe in kindness and support and queer visibility. Do you know what I'm saying? Like,
they're, you know, they tried to create an environment of inclusivity. And they created a community values statement that talked about valuing diversity and equity and inclusion, and that words and symbols matter, and that actions matter. And then they take this action where they're saying, well, we don't want to have to decide between this flag or that flag, so we're just not going to fly any. And I think it comes down to, and I know you get this too, is how much representation matters. And they don't understand how important it is to see yourself in your community, to know that you're not alone.
Affirmation.
I remember seeing a documentary about African Americans in television. And they were talking to a comedian who said, oh, back in the 60s, if there was a Black person on television, we'd call everyone into the family room. Say, Mom, there's a Black person on TV. And they'd watch whatever it was because it was such an unusual thing. And for the same for queer people, you know, if you look at pop culture in like the 70s and 80s, queer people were either murderers or murdered or trying their best to overcome their queerness. Yeah. And there were not representations of contented relationships, gay relationships or what have you.
I think that's true also, even all the way in my childhood upbringing in the 80s and 90s. That was not something that we have seen. I feel like really only just now are like our children being exposed to a world where you can, and it's so funny that you say that, because this was true for me when I was growing up. If we saw a mixed family or a Black family in a commercial for something, it was like, look at Johnson and Johnson. Okay. Like, you know, like it was not that frequent. And now today it's much more frequent where you would have like a mixed family, just like doing anything else any other family does when they shop for, you know, drugstore items, you know?
Right. And when you've grown up always being represented, you have to say, okay, that was great for me, but maybe other people have different lives. Maybe we need a little more empathy. Maybe we need to understand the importance of these symbols, the importance of representation. So yes, it's great as an individual to go and support Pride and fly a flag at your house, but do they not understand the power of government speech and the power of government silence and what that says to our kids?
Let's talk about empathy. And let's talk about empathy and affirmation and being seen, feeling seen in the context of the big thing going on right now, which is mermaids. Somehow, the big thing going on right now is mermaids. Of course, what I'm talking about is a issue that has elevated our little town to national news in the last week or two. There is a book that I think is lovely, called Julian is a Mermaid. And this book was read here at a school to a group of second graders. And this was a problem for some people. And I'll drop a link on, so people can educate themselves on what it's all about. But I would love to ask you about what this controversy means to you in the context of empathy.
Well, I think first off, it's important to note that the book has not been banned in Darien. The Board of Ed and the curriculum committee are both committed to this book staying as part of the curriculum, that it is appropriate for second graders. So I think that's important. Queer adults don't just pop up into the world all of a sudden. Queer adults start as queer children. And a book like Julian can speak to a queer child in his own language. It's not promoting anything. Yes. It's not turning anyone anyway. It's sharing a beautiful story of acceptance. And what it says to a little queer child is, there are other mermaids like me. There are other kids that maybe feel the same way I do. You can't understand the importance of representation. Well, you can. But it's a spectacular moment to see yourself in literature, to see yourself in film, in life. Kids
Does
who
this
aren't
book
feeling
only
that,
speak to queer children?
well, and that's just it. If you're not feeling that, it's still a love. First of all, it's a great story anyway, and it also speaks to how to be an ally. It speaks to how to be empathetic. That, okay, this kid says he's a mermaid, and so the biggest problem I have with the book is he kind of destroys the plant in order to make his hair, which, by the way, is my 4-year-old's favorite part. He ripped the plant apart and put it in his hair.
We can do better from a green perspective.
And the grandmother, the abuela, instead of chastising him, spoiler alert, she accessorizes him, let's say, and
with a necklace,
and affirms his mermaidness, and takes him to the mermaid parade in Coney Island. And I think kids can learn a lot from this, that it's important not to shame your friends because they feel different than you do, that you can, you have a choice. You can chastise your friends for being different, or you can give them an accessory.
Yeah. And honestly, what I'm hearing from you is words like feeling different, and different doesn't have to mean queer. That to me, that is what is incredible about all of these discussions. We're talking about something that, with the benefit of a diverse point of view and a diverse lens, you can see that everybody brings something different to an open story like this. The one thing that unites it is about affirming, and it is about accepting someone's bid for affection. When they go to a respected person who they love and say, hey, here's this thing I like. And, this happens all the time among every person in every daily interaction, you put out bids like that to your bosses, to your partners, to your parents, and your kids to you. You say, you know, I can't tell you how often my husband is like, oh, something like, you know, commercial real estate. Oh, and I'm just like, okay. You know, but that is a bid for my attention and affection, even if it's not my thing. Do you know what I'm saying? And there is an empathy question happening, saying he wants to feel seen for his little like commercial real estate discussion. So, you know, I'm gonna say, oh, that's interesting, honey. And honestly, for me, a book like this is something that really you can bring whatever it is that makes you feel seen, what makes you feel interested in and worthy of attention and accessorizing by someone that you love, you know? And for me, the fact that so many people are looking at it and only seeing a kid wearing underwear, or only seeing like a thing that has a background of, that could have a background of sort of gender expression, like you're missing it. You're missing that this is about the human experience, and that all children, all people need a little bit of reminding and learning and education on how to respond empathetically to people, to anyone in this world who's like, here's my kooky thing, you know?
Yeah. You know,
Anyway, that's my 2 cents.
I teach and perform improv comedy. And, you know, the basic tenet of improv is learning how to say yes and. And that means you accept the situation given you, and then you add to it. And that is a crucial skill in life. If we had more yes anding, if someone, you know, Mom, I feel like a girl. I'm a girl. Instead of saying, "Oh, but you're a boy," you yes and your kid. You love your kid. So you say, you like the abuela and Julian. You say, "Yes, you are a mermaid, and here's your necklace.
And let's go party."
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's so beautiful. And honestly, isn't that what like life is all about? Like improvising to what these little bits of affection that people put out there. I think honestly, there are a lot of people who are on that yes and train, but they are not connected. They're diffuse. And honestly, some of them are beleaguered. Like there has been a group of people who are more not yes and, but like no goodbye. And the no goodbye crew has been loud and aggressive, strangely aggressive in my opinion. And when you feel as a yes ander that you're under attack by like the no, sit down, goodbye people, that they are being aggressive toward you, after a while, you just start being like, oh, I want to be yes and, but I kind of just like want to go to sleep. Like this is hard. I'm scared. And I do feel like there are people who, when they see this stuff on the news, they get like, whew, okay, I support this stuff, but like this is too much for me to take on. I can't take on like a national news situation. That's way too much, you know? And that makes it really hard to, you know, support the district when they say we're standing behind the SEL curriculum. So my message is to anyone feeling beleaguered, hang in there. There's more of us than you think.
And use your voice.
And use your
voice. Know, you give public comments at a Board of Ed meeting. Write a letter to the Board of Selectmen if there's something that you feel is not right. This is such a great town, and I hate to see the only articles about us that make national news are about our inhospitality. about how
Mm,
we don't want to educate kindergartners from the town next door, about
mm,
how there are people here who don't want a book about a mermaid, about how we'd rather spend a lot of money on a private island. Let's make the national news for our menorah lighting. Let's make the national news for our pride celebrations, for our Ukraine rally. Let's make national news for our inclusiveness, for our diversity, for how far we've come from the gentleman's agreement era. And let's learn from it and bury it forever.
and celebrate that we have made this progress and that this is a town full of open-minded, wonderful people who support this stuff privately and publicly.
Yes. And
You
then
can do it, Dan.
we can also still love that we have those great beaches.
And yeah, and by the way, there's a fabulous twinkly Grove Street Plaza that has live music and fondue.
Oh yeah.
All right. Well, Dan, thank you so much for making time for this. I'm just so inspired by you. You are a true hashtag influencer. You are using your influence and power and verve in this world to create a more inclusive community. And honestly, truly, you are knitting us together through all of these efforts. You and your team of fantastic, wonderful people are knitting this community together and being real influencers. So thank you for everything that you do.
Well, you are one of my inspirations. So I'm happy to be here.
I have to ask you one last silly question, which is, how do you take your coffee?
With tea.
So herbally. Wonderful.
I don't. We don't drink coffee in our house. No, neither of us drinks coffee.
It's perfect.
$1 billion a year.
It's perfect because I feel like we spilled a little tea today.
Yeah.
That's just how I feel. All right. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, Armel.
Mwah.